Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're learning about the English opening. Now, it is a very hypermodern opening. You don't use E4 or D4 to control the center like we normally do. You are using one C4. You're using a flank pawn to control the center. And it leads to lots and lots of variations. It's the fourth most commonly played opening in terms of the opening moves. The three above it are obviously E4, D4, and Knight F3. Now, there are ways in which Knight F3 can transpose into Englishes, but we're not going to talk about that today. What we are going to talk about is the 2 or 3 main responses. Now, the most fighting response is E5. If at any point you get confused or you get worried, the moves will be in the description down below. Now, E5 is like the reverse Sicilian. Effectively, you have played E4, your opponent has played E4, and you have played C5, the Sicilian defense, but you've got to move up. So it leads to very interesting positions. The most common move thereafter is Knight to C3, and then we get Knight to F6, Knight to F3, Knight C6, and now G3. In a lot of the Englishes, not just in the reverse Sicilian, you will put the bishop on to G2, and you will fight for this diagonal. It kind of complements the move C4 because you're helping control this D5 square. That's why in this case, D5 is the most commonly played move. We get takes, and now, if you look at the structure, it definitely resembles a reverse Sicilian. If black had like the bishop here, black's knight was the one in the middle of the board. If you will humor me just for a moment, E4, C5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Knight here, G3, D5, here, takes, and now bishop to G2. Look at this position, and look at this position, with now the bishop going to G2. Vaguely similar, vaguely. So yeah, bishop to G2, and then from here the game transposes in a couple different ways. Most commonly with Knight to B6, short castles, and that's kind of the opening 7 moves. Black, you can see, has got choices of where to put the light squared bishop, where to put the dark squared bishop. It's got several decent developing moves, short castles on the way, and here the game really transposes. So, bishop to E7. I keep saying it and giving you more moves, but white's plans, you can see lots of interesting ideas. So a combination of sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied for a sec. Let me just take a sip of water. A combination of A3, B3, D3, E3, Rook B1, all kind of plans in this position. You are trying to utilize this. That should be your ultimate goal. So D3 is a useful move because it gets the bishop out. It prevents this pawn coming forward in some positions. E3 is not a horrible move looking to potentially build D4. These moves just disallow the knights coming forward into your position as well as the bishop at various points. And you're really trying to utilize this. This is like a Catalan, but the position is not as locked. And you don't have committed these pawns just yet. One of the advantages is, of course, like when black plays the Sicilian, you can get the rook on the C file. So sometimes rook to B1 is not necessary. Rook to C1 is what you're after, opening up the C file. It could also belong to the queen, but you don't want to get hit with these knight moves, so A3 is not a bad waiting move. And it is why it is one of the most commonly played moves in this position. Anyway, back to C4. Of course, there are many other responses, the most boring one of which is C5. The symmetrical variation. Now, this is played because it's not as sharp. If you watch the opening moves, Knight F3, Knight C6, Knight C3, and then G6 here in this position. But it could very well have been Knight F6. It's very symmetrical. Now, what the main plan for white is here is to play E3, D5 to build that structure. So E3, Knight to F6, D4. That is the structure you're looking for. CD4, ED4, and now something like D5 from black. This is really what we're after, and then we get this exchange of pawns in the center of the board. So white is left with an IQP. They've traded their C and their E pawns, and they're left with an isolated queen's pawn, and that is what the game is going to be contested about. Of course, it's not the only way for the game to move forward, but it is one of the most common moves. I think I've jumped down the wrong line. Yes, I have. I jumped down the wrong line there. It was like, what's on the board? Yes, so the main line symmetrical. The idea in this variation is to achieve the pawn break on d4 for white. Black, on the other hand, calmly accept the pawn exchange and develop comfortably with the idea of pinning and destroying the white knight on c3 when it gets there. So if we go through a few more moves, obviously it's capture, you're taking here, knight takes, and white's got to be careful because the idea is obviously you're putting the bishop there, there's queen coming out, and there are various threats. So black gets very easy and quick development. White has achieved their pawn break, and both sides are now playing a game of chess. Anyway, c5, c4, c4. There is one other move, and I left it for last because it's knight f6. The reason I left it for last, this is called the Anglo-Indian defense. Don't worry about that. Is because it can often transition into this, which is just d4, c4, and now you're left with e6, g6, and you're left with all the normal moves. It's as if you started with d4 and then played c4, and now you could get into a queen's gambit, you could get into Grunfelds, or queen's Indians, or king's Indians, and it's very much allows transpositions. You will also notice you can play knight f3 in this position. That's why I said the ready move order. Sometimes you start with knight f3 and you see what white responds with, because if they respond with e4, well, let's get rid of this knight, then you can play c4 and you're in a reverse Sicilian. And it's just one more way to play the English opening. I hope this is all making sense. If it's not, tell me in the comments and I will redo how I make these videos. There is one other opening. It's not played a lot. It's the English Scandinavian. So you play the Anglo-Scandinavian, the English Scandinavian. So you play d4, like you would have played if white had started the game with e4. This is the Scandinavian defense main line with takes, queen takes, and knight kicking the queen to a5. That's all well and good. In the Anglo-Scandinavian, you get captures, queen takes e5, knight to c3, and now queen to d6. g3, as we've seen in a lot of positions, e5, gaining central space, bishop to g2, knight to f6, and this has been played. I'm looking at the top games in the Elite Chess database. It's not been played by great players. Not going to pretend otherwise, but this is definitely a line, and if you're potentially black, if you play black a lot and you struggle with the English opening, so if we, can I flip the board? I can flip the board. So if you're playing black against the English, playing, where is that line now? Playing d5 is not a horrible option. It's considered slightly dubious, maybe, because you're giving up a central pawn for a c-pawn. You're giving up this d-pawn for the c-pawn, which is what black achieves a lot with the Sicilian defense. And when you get kicked out here, you can continue to play this like a normal Scandinavian if it's in your repertoire. Slightly worse for black, but that's fine. I don't know why the engine's gone. Anyway, so we get knight to like f3. Then we can get various c5. So just controlling some of the central space. e4. Something like knight to c6. Bishop pinning the knight. And something like bishop to d7. And the queen can drop back at various points. We get bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, and now something like knight e5 even is in various points. And now you can play a bunch of different moves: queen c7, c6, knight f6, c8, rook d8. It's an interesting line, and it's definitely something you can have a look at. I don't want to say that's the English in a nutshell, but that's the English in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. There are obviously lots of awesome lines in the English. It is played by grandmasters. They do believe in it to some degree. Obviously, most games go e4 and then d4. But c4 and knight f3, the English and the ready, and I will make a video about the ready at some point, are really good games and are really good openings because they're not prepared for as much. So the opening knowledge and theory is not as well explored, maybe by top GMs, but at master level, maybe even not. People don't look at it as much. I certainly don't spend hours and hours looking at English opening theory. I spend my time on D4 and E4. And when I see the English or I see knight F3, I play it by ear, I wing it. Not a great thing to admit when you're striving to become a title player. I'm nowhere near that yet, although I have got my FIDE rating now, which I will disclose in a video coming soon. But it is a good weapon that you can use, and it's really interesting, I think. That's just my opinion. But tell me what you think of the English opening. Do you play it? And what lines do you like to play? I mean, there are lots of different nuances in the English, where whether you come out and you play like a 4 knights English, which is very symmetrical. Do you play this G3 setup? G3 bishop to G2 it seems the most logical way to play. But of course, there are ways where you get the bishop out normally and you play it almost like a queen's pawn position. So tell me what you use it. Even if you use it as a way to transposition into various queen's gambit or queen's pawn positions. There was a lot of words there, but I hope it all made sense. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching, and I hope the video was good, and I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me in the comments what you think.